Hello everyone, my name is Ray Konopka and we are going to dive into list controls in our mobile apps. After a real brief overview of some of the functionality that our mobile apps need with respect to list controls, we're going to look at two list controls that are part of the FM application platform, the Listbox and the Listview. And after that, we have a whole lot of code to go through and learn how to make the most effective use out of those. Just real quick, everyone should realize just how important lists are into the mobile space. They are used everywhere. In varieties that you may even think of are as a list. Messages, for example, the balloons. It's just a list. Fancy display, but a list. We use them all the time. They're very effective, and fortunately, FireMonkey gives us some really powerful controls that we can do a lot with. So that functionality that we need is not just a typical list of string values that we want to display. There's more to it. We want to have extra data, detail information. We want to be able to group the data categorically or have header information and footer details. We want images embedded into the list items and have other indicators to let us know when there's more information to jump to, or setting current values and things like that. Of course, we should be able to search the list, having built-in filtering capability to quickly find what we're looking for. And then if we have extra capabilities to embed controls to give us more flexibility, great. So the TListBox control was the original list control in the FM application platform, and it is very flexible. You can customize all kinds of aspects for it. It's style driven, so it has all kinds of capabilities, but it's pretty much designed for short lists because of all the extra overhead in managing the styles and things. If you have a large amount of data that you want to display and scroll through and bind to a data source, a list view is a better choice. And through all this code examples, we're going to see the differences between the two of them and how we can customize each to get the effect that we want. So just kind of some main differences between the Listbox and the Listview. Listbox is a container type of control with each item being its own sub-control. And there's header items and footer items and regular items. There's even a header box, a header bar, and a search box that can be added in as separate controls. Again, the style lookup allows you to customize every aspect of the display. And then there's different ways to group, and then to do multi-selection, there's a show checkboxes option which allows you to select different items. Now the list view, on the other hand, is designed with collection items in mind. So each item is part of a collection, so they're very lightweight. You don't have as much flexibility with respect to driving it by styles, but that doesn't mean you can't customize its appearance. And there's several ways to do that we'll look at in the source code examples. There's searching built in, and there's also an edit mode, which provides not just multi-select, but you can have built-in deletion capabilities and some other nice benefits as well. So I have several examples that we're going to go through, and let's get started. Before I show my pre-built settings app, I wanted to show the Listbox and how you create things and set it up at design time, because there's some differences that you may not be familiar with. So I've dropped a Listbox on the form and I've aligned it to the client. I'm just getting things started to get a feel for it. And the first thing that we'll note is that there is an items property, which is like the regular Listbox in the VCL, where you could get a list of strings and add them, and they just show the strings into the contents. But that's not giving us the flexibility that we need. Instead, if we're going to build a settings editor, we're going to use the editor to add in new items. And so we may start with a group header, and then we'll add that item to our display. Then we'll take the Listbox item and we'll add those. And remember I said how these were all like subcomponents into a container, and you can see how this is driven much like that. And so we can create any number of items that we want. And so for each of these, they're selectable. They're a Listbox item that we can now go and find the switch control and drop that right into the display. We can align that to the right, for example, put a little margins on it so it's off the edge, and we've got our controls set up like that. We can go in and add other information for like if we wanted to put a little detail piece of information here, we can do that in this item data, and there's a sub property that's called detail. And so I can just type in detail and nothing magically happens, which makes sense because I haven't told this item how to display itself. Each item will use the default item style from the list box, and that's over in the default item styles. And so we can see that it says list box item no detail. So even though specifying a detail, nothing shows up. So instead, I have to go to the control. That's the one that I did that on, item data detail. Then go to the style lookup for this one and change that to detail on the right. And now I can see my detail item. And that's how I got I'm going to get preview line showing up in there. And then I can also change the accessory to a more, which gives me my little arrow. And likewise, you can make all these changes. You can embed an image, there's a bitmap, and we can populate all of these. The other piece I wanted to show is if you go to the list box and change the group kind to grouped, you get this look, and it looks a little odd, and that's mostly just because of the melding of the iOS 6 and 7 styles in the IDE. But we can fix that by going to the list box and changing the list box style to be transparent. And now you have that traditional look of what you would be expecting. And if we change that to the iOS 7 style, that's its version of what it looks like in iOS 7. So now let's switch over to my application that is pre-built with some functionality. So here's my pre-built settings application. It really just focuses on the UI elements for it. I've dropped some additional properties down. I've set up this item to go to a different view. I'm using the action list change tab actions to switch between the views. So I just pick which tab I want to switch to and then how I want it to transition. So they're both going to slide back and forth. Very simple to do. We'll see how we make that change in code. We just execute the action on a target and everything will work. So let's go ahead and give this a run. So we have our iOS 7 style. That's the version of the simulator I'm running. And of course, each of these can be checked and selected and so forth. If I click on this, I actually switch to a new view with another list box that has the different items I want. And I'm using another accessory type, the check mark, to select an item and give me the change. So pretty straightforward, nothing super complicated. It was just more or less in the setup. Each item, if I click on it, I just call that change tab action with myself to do the switching, and the action takes care of all the extra work for me. All of the rest of this thing is just if I'm creating the items for that particular piece. When I click one of the preview items, I clear out the accessory and then make sure I set the one with the right value and then copy it back. And then after you click it, I change the view back to the original. Pretty straightforward. Okay, moving on to my next example. Staying with the list box, I have a new application. It's my little Major League Baseball app that just shows the different teams because they have different groups, which division they play in. They have the rankings, and each team has players. And so there's a lot we can do with lists if we wanted to do that. And so let me run the application first, and then we can get a feel for how this works and how it's created to do all the things that we do. So again, I'm compiling this out. I've got my whole PA server on my Mac that's doing all the build, running the simulator for me, and we'll pop that up in just a second. And so once we get that refreshed, what we're seeing here, and I've got the iOS 7 version of the simulator running with the Retina display, and I've got several groups, the different divisions in Major League Baseball. I've got the names of the teams, the order in which they finished, and their win-loss record. And I can scroll through this whole list. I can also click on the search little icon and type in something I might be interested in. The Cubs. They did not have a good year this year, but I'm a diehard Cub fan, and I can. We're going to see how to do the searching, and it will filter our list for us. We can close that down, of course, get back to our whole list, scroll around, and click Chicago Cubs, and we get a list of the various players that show up. And so I have their position, I've got their name. The names are getting clipped a little bit. I've got some alignment issues on some of this thing. Some of that is tied to the style. Some of it is just based on the way the control is, and it's a little rigid, and we're going to see that. This is a back button to take me back to the standings. This allows me, if I wanted to put this into a selection mode and select the various items that I need, what can I can then do something on that. And so just showing you the different interface points for that. So let's see how this was all put together. So I have another tab control. I have a header. This is just a little button that's going to do the searching. The main workhorse on the main page is the list box for the standings. And you'll note I have no items in here at design time. I'm driving everything from code. So we showed how to create items at design time in the first example. Now we're going to look at how do we do it in code to get that flexibility. So let's take a look at that code. And when we start up, we set our initial tabs and we call load standings. And load standings is just going to go through some data structures that I've created to hold my data. So it's really lightweight. It's just simple data. I'm not having to worry about connecting to a server or anything like that. I'm just putting some realistic data on my display. So one of the things, like whenever we're dealing with lists, we want to wrap up multiple edits in a begin update, end update pair. And so that's what's being done here when we populate the standings list. I'm iterating through the various divisions of my data structures. So that's the American League and National League, West, East, and Central. For each of those, there's 5 teams, and so I kind of know my data. In this case, of course, this could be programmatic based on ranges. I come back and get a club based on the standings that I've recorded, and if I get team information from that, I can actually put that team information onto the list. Well, how do I do that? Well, I have to create a new Listbox item, and I have it owned by my Listbox. So it's just nice because then the Listbox will take care of destroying it and freeing it up. And of course, we're on the mobile space, so things are reference counted. And so that's a whole different thing. So we don't have to worry too much about it, but we're still playing nicely. To set up the text for the item, I'm setting it to the team name. So that's where the Chicago Cubs and the Baltimore Orioles and every other team gets its data from. The detail information is coming from, remember how I looked at that at design time in the property? I'm just doing it at runtime. So I'm setting the details string of item data to be the wins and the loss record. And so if we look at that over to the right a little bit, you'll see it's got the team losses. Likewise, to do the accessory, I'm just setting the accessory for this item to be more. And finally, I'm just recording for use what club enum it is so that I can jump to the right team when they pick one. And then finally, that created the item. I still need to add it to the list box so that it gets displayed. And that's done with the add object call. And finally, wrap it up and do my end update. That's it. Pretty straightforward. So let's scroll down. What happens when I go and click on one of the items in the standings list, one of the teams? Well, the first thing I'm doing is I'm switching to the roster page. And the tab control is really nice for setting up multiple views in your mobile app. And it's got built-in functionality to do the transitions. To set that up, what you need to do is drop an action list onto your form and then double click it, and you're going to create a new standard action. I had already created the change tab one, which is the one I want, but if you don't see that, you go into standard action and find the tab group. Change tab action allows you to basically pick which tab do you want to switch to when this action gets fired, and how do you want the transition to occur. You can slide it, or it can be none, and there's some other settings that you can do for that. But it makes it really easy to switch different views. So that's what I do. I switch to the roster view, get the club information, and then load the roster list box in much the same way. So that's what this next function down here does. I'm basically clearing the list box. So do the begin and update, clear the box, create a new item, but this time I'm actually populating it with the position and the rosters, the player's name, and the detail is their batting average. And then of course I have no accessory because there's nothing else after that. It's just the list of players. And then I add that to the list and I'm done. To go back, I just do this same thing with the actions, going back to my original standings list. And then to do the search off the main screen, I'm just, one of the things I didn't show is if I go back to the list box, there's a search box property. And where that came from is if you right click on the list box and select add item, it doesn't show up in the editor that comes up. It's only in the add item. There is a list box header, which can be used to put a header toolbar on above the list box. There's also this search box. And so I added that in, and if we go back, I have it false by default, but let me make it, or I have visible turned off by default. If I turn that back on, that's what the search box is. So this button simply toggles that to be on or off. What's nice is because it's connected to the list box, it knows how to filter the list box. You don't have to make any changes to it. And so there's no code other than to show the search box and make that work. So I just toggle it with that button. I could focus it and put the focus into it so that the keyboard would come up right away. Certainly you could extend things a little bit more. To do the show the checkboxes, as I showed on the other screen, that simply is calling the show checkboxes for that item. So now that's our list box version of it. It's okay. I didn't like that the text was clipped in a lot of places, and I didn't have a lot of control. The batting average was very big because it's the same font that's used as the regular text item. There's no way I didn't have any delete capability built in that I may want to remove people off my roster and things like that. So let's look at the Listview version of it, and same application, and let's see how it's different. Okay, I have the same application, but this is the MLB Listview version of it. So most of the same functionality, actually has a little bit more functionality, benefit of the Listview, but structured the same way. So let me run it just so that we can see what it does the same, what's different, and so forth. So everything else is the same, so it's going to start up, compile it. It's still going to go against the iOS 7 simulator, so it's going to pick up the new style once it's running on that device. And so here we go. We've got our main screen that comes up. We have we have all of the text of the item, the team name, so there's no clipping that's going on. All of our information is in our detail view like we expect it. We have our different groups, so I can scroll, and it's snappy. That's one of the first things you'll note, is it's snappier than the list box, which is great. Searching still works. I can click on that. Has the same functionality. I can find the Cubs. I can click this, go back in, and now I get, again, notice this is a little bit smaller than the other text. The other version was quite big and took up a lot of room. We've got our full player information, the full name is being displayed there. We still have the lineup capability, and so when I click on these, I can do my multi-select if that's what I so choose. I can close that off. I can go in and click edit, and this is a new button that, because of the list view, gives us the ability to have these two different edit modes. I can now have built-in delete functionality. So I click the delete, I can click it, he got injured, he got traded, I think he went back down to the minors, and you can edit your list just from the control. And so let's take a look at the code needed to drive all of this. So back in the IDE here, let me switch back to our code. I'm using the same data structure as before, so there's nothing different on any of that. Do the same thing. The load standings changes subtly. I still rip through the different divisions. However, instead of creating a new object, remember how I said it's very much like collection driven, and that is very true here, is that we are creating a new item from the list view itself. We say listview.items.add. It gives us back a list view item. From there, I set the text. In this case, I'm actually setting the header. So I have to change its purpose. So there's no list view header. It's a list view item that's purpose is as a header. And then we'll see how it knows what to change its style a little bit later. Then going for each team in that division, I get the club information. Once I get a reference to the team, I can now update the item details. So I create a new item. I get the team name into the text portion. I set the detail. So I'm not doing the item data.detail. I'm just doing item.detail with the information string that I want, and I can set the accessory the same way. There's also an image property that I can set up for each of those items as well. And then of course do my end update when I'm done. So that's how I populate the list. Very similar, just the way in which we create it's different, and the way we manipulate the properties is a little bit different. And then moving on to do the selecting of the team is done exactly the same way. We load the roster of the team same way. Clear the list, we rip through, we create a new item by asking the list view, the roster list view, for a new item instead of its text. Now, one of the things you'll note here is there's nothing that's being done inside of code to change and make that average look smaller. So we still have to figure out where that's being done, and that's done at design time, and I'll show that in just a second. There's also no item.accessory type of none. And so if you wanted to hide the accessory indicator, because by default it shows the little arrow, you have to go into this item appearance object and toggle it off. And I'll show that when we switch to the design surface again. And then switching back to the different tabs is done the same way. Instead of changing the extra control, the T search box control that the Listbox uses, we simply change the search visible property of our list view, and when that's true, then the Listbox is visible. And again, the searching filtering is built into the control. It's wonderful. The editing capability and the lineup selection is done almost the same way. It's initiated by changing the edit mode for the list view. But what happens depends on what this item edit appearance setting is set to. And what we can see is that if it's in the edit mode, we are setting it to the list item right detail delete, which means that it shows it's a list item and it has detail on the right, and then we're going to show a delete button to do the actual delete. If it's the appearance is a list item right detail show check, then we're going to show a check mark on the left side so that we can select the items. And so it's driven by this item edit appearance. And that's it. That's all the code that required that functionality to work. The data structure is in this MLB team data that you can look at if you're interested. So switching back to design time, what I first wanted to talk about is taking a closer look at these properties that are with the list view. And the couple things up top that it kind of leads you to understand there's some extra functionality here. There's built-in alternating colors, for example. We can swipe delete is a built-in. So, oh, that's great. So I bet there's some way to do the deletion. You just have to find it. There's this edit mode property that's what we're changing when we click the buttons on the roster. But really where it gets interesting is right in the middle here. This item appearance and item appearance objects. And so if we open up item appearance, we are going to see several different sub-properties. And the first one to look at is called item appearance. I know it's kind of weird. It's item appearance dot item appearance. And by default, it will be set to list item, which means it will only show the text of the item. It won't show any detail. Well, I would like it to show detail, and now I can determine where it goes. I can say I want the detail to be on the right, for example. And so I will change that, and then when I do that, the control knows how to display that information differently. And in addition, there's also this item edit appearance. That was what we were changing for the edit mode. The item height will affect how high each item is in normal mode. Edit height is if it's in editing mode, if you needed to make them bigger. You can change what the header height is and the header looks like. Right now it's either custom or it's just the regular. What's interesting about this is, let me go back to list item and then open up this item appearance objects, which has a bunch of objects inside of it. It's the ones you're most interested in are item objects and item edit objects. And so if we open up item objects, we see we have accessory and text. And that's because when you have the list item appearance, those are the only two things that are visible that you can display. So the text portion of it and what accessory is being displayed. Now, what's interesting about this is that I can expand this text, and now I can control where that text goes. So if I wanted to make the text a little bit larger, I can go in and change the font size for it. If I wanted to make it, if I wanted to align it differently, you can go in and align these separate. I'm going to show a lot of those customizations in my final example in just a little bit. But what I found interesting in this is that if I go back now and change list item, keep your eye on this. So I'm going to change list item down to item right detail, and a detail entry opens up in my display. And this gives me the ability to customize how that looks. Now, it doesn't give me the content. So there's no detail.text in here. We get to that through the item itself. The item detail is how you set it. This is describing where it goes and how it looks. And so to make that smaller, I can go in and change the font size. I can make it align left or right. I can vertically align it to the top part of the box and move it to the bottom. And so I encourage you to look around and dig into those properties to see all that's there, because it does a lot. And there's a lot of different ways you can customize it without sacrificing the performance benefits, because they're all very lightweight objects that it manages that. So for my last example, I wanted to extend or modify an example I created for a data visualization webinar I did over the summer. And in that example, which is the code I have in front of you, I used a Listbox to show a fancy display of various rating information for food processors, for example. The idea was to show a more customized appearance. And I accomplished that by using styles and creating a very sophisticated style with custom controls that I had created for the session to be used inside of each item's display. And the end result was quite impressive. Once I worked through all the mechanics of getting the styles set up correctly and then loaded onto the into the iOS app appropriately, everything worked great. So I'm just going to run the app real quick. This is the original one from the data visualization, and if you're interested in how all of the styles were created, you can certainly download that from the Embarcadero website. It's still available. The key piece is I just wanted to highlight what it looks like. And so I've got custom styles. This is like the detail, but everything in this is all custom. I'm not using any of the standard functionality. It works. It's just, even on the simulator, it's a little bit sluggish. There's a lot that it's doing to manage all the styles and update the data underneath the covers. And when you run it on the device, it's even more so. So knowing that the Listview is more performant, I wanted to see what could I do to get the Listview to work. So that is the next task. So I'm going to bring up my ratings list view example, and a couple things we'll note right off the bat is, one, I'm using a client data set, but I'm also using live bindings with a bind source, and I can immediately see some information show up inside the display. And this is the text and this is the detail information, but you might be wondering, well, how's that showing up over there? Well, that's all through customizations of the item appearance and item appearance objects. So I set the item appearance to be list item right detail, so the detail field shows up. But and let me pull up the live designer live bindings here. The brand and the model are connected to the Listview's pieces. So the Listview knows how to take part in live bindings, so that's all set up for us. So that's how it's getting populated from the client data set. The detail shows up because I changed the item appearance. I went into the item appearance objects and then changed the detail. I changed its alignment. I changed where the vertical alignment, so it's down at the bottom vertically. It's on the left side of the display, hence the leading. The text part of it, it's still leading, but now it's leading vertically, so it's at the top of the entry. So that's how I got them to position themselves one on top of the other. The key piece is, how do I get the rating icons and the other fields of information into this display? And fortunately, I found an example which kind of got me in the right direction from Jim Tierney as part of the Rad Studio examples. And he ended up utilizing an event on the Listview called onUpdateObjects. And so I dug into that, and that's essentially what I'm using to add additional controls to the item itself. But control is too heavy of a word. A list view item has elements in it. There's a text element, there's a detail element, there's an accessory element, there's even a delete button element and things like that. Well, I can create a new element and add it into the item so that it gets used. And so that's the first thing I wanted to do for the product cost and the overall score, was just add another text item to it. And so I take the item that gets passed into update objects and see, hey, do you know about a field called product cost? And if you don't, well, let's create one. And it's associated with the item that we're manipulating. We give it a name and then set up some initial properties based on where it goes. And I set up everything to the right edge and then offset it with the place offset.x to be further in, depending on how far away I want it to be. I did that for the product cost and the overall score. For my ratings little icons, well, it's not really a text element, and I can't put my custom control, which I'll show in the next session, into here, but I needed a new kind of list item. And this is something that I built. It's in the rating list items class. And what it does is pretty straightforward. It's kind of like a simple component. It's got a render property, which is like the paint. I've got some properties that I'm manipulating, and I create and destroy, and I have one publish property that drives what value to use. The little element, if you will, this list item, knows about the different path types it needs to display. So while it's not a custom control, it does use all the FireMonkey primitives like a custom control does. And so if you're not familiar with those, tune in for my next session and I'll show that all to you. The cool thing is in the render, we simply pick out the right path to use based on the rating value, update the fill color appropriately, because some of them are black, others are red, adjust the size of the path to the local rectangle, which is inherited, and it tells us where we can draw, and then actually draw the path onto the canvas. And that's it. So the cool thing is once we've created these objects, we now have these elements inside of each list view item that's there. The challenge now is, well, how do I get data into them? And so that was the next piece, is I name each of the icons based on the type of data I want to put into them, and then I adjust their offset. Fortunately, Live Bindings has the ability to hook into this connection, the filled list item event. And by using that, I can actually get the object as a list item text for the text fields this is from the list view item, get its text label, so that's the element I want to manipulate, the primitive. And from there, get a database field from my Live Bindings bind source that represents the data I want, and then if they're both valid, I just move the data into the control. And the same is true for the others. Ratings just uses the integer value in the rating field to update the rating icon rating value. And so they're all done the same way. And that's it. There's a resize that I have commented out at the minute, but that's the end of the code. So the cool thing is, what does it look like when I run it? So we have our application running. You can see that we have the visual indicators, just like the previous application that did it with a list box and custom styles. We've all driven it by code, so we're not creating extra styles and nesting things. We just create the lightweight little elements that we need. We've added the data. What's really cool is that it's got all the speed improvements that the list view brings to the table, because we're not having all the extra baggage and trying to resolve string lookups and all the name resolutions that can take place. So with a little bit of effort and a little bit of connections and working, we can get a very sophisticated view customized for our display purposes with the high performance capabilities of the TListView for our mobile applications. I know we went through really quick. There isn't a whole lot of time in these Code Rage sessions, and I really wanted to provide a lot of detailed information of how to use the Listbox and the Listview controls in our FireMonkey apps to give us the most benefit for what our users demand. So certain cases where the Listbox makes perfect sense to use it because of its customization capabilities and containership. Other times the Listview is a rock-solid control that gives you high performance and lots of flexibility with connecting it to Live Bindings and so forth. I will be, of course, staying on the line to answer any questions for our Q&A section. And of course, I'll be making all the source code for all these examples available to Embarcadero for the Code Rage distribution. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
We had people asking questions about this yesterday, and we're like, watch Ray's session tomorrow. He'll tell you.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, there was one here that we were having this whole discussion yesterday with
Alistair Christie
about what to use the tag property for in this anti-patterns thing, and use the tag property, I think, to combine people into a club or into a baseball club, right?
I use them to just basically as a little helper to move data from one view to the other, so that I know what they clicked on. Could I have used another object or another way to do it? Certainly. But for the sake of this, it served its purpose quite well.
Yep.
Yeah, we were just trying to figure out. I mean, we all had different things, and there was some crazy stories, people using tag property like for pointer storage and other stuff.
Sure, yeah. I think if you go back farther enough, then they're all there. And I remember back, if you want to go way back, when first clicks came out, and then VCL.net came out, then the tag turned into an object, and that threw people for a loop because you ended up having to box the integers to get them in there then, and it was this whole mess. But yeah, tag still lives on.
Yes.
And we noted that it's native int now as opposed to integer before. Yeah.
All right. So here's a slightly off topic. It says, in your presentation and other presentations, you can see a theme selector. Oh, right to the devices selector in the UI editor. This is for iOS 7 theme support. That's a hotfix you can download from the registered user downloads. So that's
right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. If you want your form to pick up the iOS 7 style at design time, you need to download that update, as Jim just said. And once you install that, then you get that little combo box up at the top next to the device list, and you can switch between the two. And it gives you the idea to look to see how the style changes from one to the other.
Yep. So it says, is this a simulator working on Windows? Is the next question.
No, it's not. I'm actually running on a MacBook Pro. My Windows machine's inside of a Parallels VM, and the simulator is the iOS simulator, which you need in order to compile and run your iOS app.
Yep. And so it just appears over the top when you're doing.
Correct. It just appears over the top. I set it up that way so I don't have to do a lot of screen switching and things, which when you do a video with a few frames per second, it just gets too choppy. So that way it keeps things in context better.
That's the exact same way I run it, but every now and then I see a video and it pops up and I'm like, oh, how'd they do? Oh, that's right.
Yeah, VMware Fusion, I think it's called Unity.
Yeah, you can do that with
Unity mode. Yeah,
or you can
VMware Fusion.
Or if you're running it in non-Unity mode, it'll still can show up on top of the other window.
Yeah, but actually, Parallels has the same kind of thing called coherence. I don't run it in that. Actually, I just have it in. I have my VM set up as a window with its VM window is hosted at the resolution I want. And so it's just another window on my desktop rather than getting rid of all of the VM menu options and command bars above it. I just have it recording a subset of it.
So you have a window on top of other windows, including Windows as one of those windows.
That is correct.
There we go.
Lots of little windows going on there.
Okay. What's the best way to show data that has multiple columns of data, like 5 or 6 columns?
Well, I kind of touched a little bit about that in one of the examples there with the food processor and the ratings. I mean, the thing you have to worry about with the mobile platform is readability and spacing between your columns. And the approach that I did was to get rid of some of the numeric data because it's harder to read when you have a lot of it together. Use symbols to do that. In my case, adding in the extra customizations, either using a style if I'm using a Listbox, or the dynamically modifying each list view item with the ratings, extra control, if you will, the extra element as I described it, to add that column or data works very well. But just keep in mind that as you add more and more data, it gets noisier and harder to read. So you usually don't want to go more than, I'd say with a portrait orientation, if depending on how much text you're displaying to identify it, maybe 5, 6 columns is probably a good limit. Landscape mode, you can obviously go more, but if you start going to like vertical of 10 columns, you're not going to have enough spacing to really get some good info on that. You're better off showing them a summary view and then letting them drill deeper into more data.
Okay. A lot of people saying, wow, great session, wow, great day, wow, great framework.
Well, thank you. That's what these presentations are all about, and this whole event. This is Code Rage 8, and I think the presenters that we've had some presenters who've been doing this for a while and some new presenters with new topics, and you get that a wide variety of topics and different viewpoints, and it's just, you know, like a regular conference. You get a lot of good info here.
Yeah.
They can come to my 5 mistakes that people make moving from desktop to mobile, and I'll show how I did a master detail with 2 grids on a desktop, big desktop, and then I just recompiled it for iPhone. And
Excellent.
even in landscape mode, what you can see is sort of the outline of 2 grids, barely see parts of the navigators, and none of the data in the thing. And we switched that to be Listview for the master that you select from, and then you could swipe to get more information about each of the master items you select, and then you could do another page, you know, control, tab control within a control to go and see the orders for the customer you had selected. So,
right. Well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this kind of session, because when you go to mobile, I mean, lists are so prevalent in everything that you do. And, you know, it's a common question that people are asking is, how do I get the data that I want? How do I manage this? How do I do it dynamically? How do I bind it to data? All of these different things have come about, and now we have, you know, 2 controls with lots of power servicing, you know, different needs that you need on that mobile space.
so here you go. It's small fonts with magnifying glass.
So here Keith wants to, he says, I'm displaying a stack of 3D pie charts, displaying the pie charts in a side view. Then when the view is changed to top view, all of the pie chart values are aggregated into a single pie chart. So is it possible to display a stack of 3D pie chart side view in a list view component?
Well, you can have an image, you can have a bitmap. So if you had a bitmap version of the pie chart by saving it,
it may be possible to do it with the chart itself, but to really answer that, I'd actually have to look back into the code of the list items, and because where I would start to look is to see if one of the control item types specifically designed to allow the buttons to show up. So the delete button and the other buttons that you can add into a list item, a list view item, I'll be precise,
right?
To where you could create your own descendant of that and allow you to plug in, say, a T-chart or some other control. But I'll tell you right now, the problem I ran into, because my first approach was to do something similar, and that was take the component I'm going to show in the next session, and which is what I used in the summer data visualization webinar, and host that inside of an element for a list view item and just reuse the component itself. But the problem that you run into is that you can kind of get it to work, but you can't get any data into it because the data property is not protected. It's private at the base level, and so your control doesn't get access to it, which is one of the reasons why I have to specifically go after the element itself rather than get the data. And while you might be able to work the conduit, the plumbing to get the data into your controller, the T-chart data into it, it may be possible, but it definitely would take some extra work to see if you can actually get that level that you're looking for. The problem that you have is you might be better off, what David suggested, is taking a thumbnail image of the T-chart and using that to host inside the list view.
And then click on it right, to go and bring up the real thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. We had a discussion last week, Jim, if you remember, here in Scotts Valley, about with Yuri and some of the team that do Listview, Listbox, do FireMonkey, and one of the things that they noted is if you start doing more things in a list view, the list view is going to slow down if you've got lots of items in it.
Correct.
And Listbox already, pays that price because you can put anything into a Listbox item, put lots of things, right?
Right.
And again, that's why it's better for just a few items. So if you have a few items, you might use a Listbox and put a real T-chart in an item of a Listbox, but again, I just favor this kind of thumbnail image kind of approach, which you can get the bitmap from a T-chart graph. It's one of the methods, and use it, like you say, as a kind of thumbnail, so you have a glanceable little bit that says, oh, there's some little wedges of a pie chart. tap on it and then bring up a full page on your device. Just seems to, it seems to feel right somehow. I don't know.
So here's another question from Oren. He says, if you're not using bind sources, can you use the list view with multiple elements, adding the elements manually?
Yes.
Okay.
Is the short answer to that. The example that I used before the food processor one, where I just did with the list view version of the Major League Baseball teams, dynamically adds in the items in the list view items. So you create that, you can set the purpose of the item, and you can then manipulate that. Could you extend and handle the on update objects method of that version and then make modifications to it or change other settings? You could, but you still have to, depending on the item type that you create and the settings of the control itself for the appearance, those are still going to affect how that looks. So there is a lot of customization, but it's controlled. So you're not running rampant and being able to have so much flexibility that it takes too much time to manage the items is really key. But you can certainly populate the list view with the items yourself and what features you want of that without having to have a bind source.
Okay, so here's another question. It says, are the controls on the side part of your Raize control collection?
Yes, that would be part of Raize components. If it was when I was in, yeah, they probably would have been at the top. When it was a FireMonkey form for the iOS stuff, they were probably non-visual controls that were towards the top, so those can be used in any non-visual space targeting Windows right at the moment. The Raize components itself does not support FireMonkey just because it's intimately tied to the VCL and it's different purposes, different tooling.
Okay, so this next question doesn't make sense to me, but maybe you have context I don't. What you have obtained Y ord of structure type? Nope. Okay.
Oh, no, so that is for, I'm assuming that is a reference to taking the ordinal value of an enum and assigning it to an integer that's used elsewhere.
Right, okay.
That would be my only guess of where that's being used.
Okay. Can both Listbox and Listview be sorted?
Yes.
Okay. And someone's asking for the link to your Code Rage 8 discount again. Is that in the exhibit hall?
It is that. Yeah, the easiest way to get to it is in the exhibit hall. Yeah, that's just, yeah, if you go there through the Code Rage 8 and the exhibit hall, you'll go to the page that has the whole discount information.
Right, I'm getting there and I'll paste it in.
So someone wants to know how to make the simulator default to iOS 6 because yours came up as iOS 7.
So this is an interesting question because one of the things you'll run into with the live bindings, you may have noticed I had to run the simulator in 6 for the food processor ones where I was using the live bindings and the client data set in particular. It's not a live bindings issue, it's a client data set issue. And what I ended up finding is if you have Xcode 5 and you install the iOS 7 SDK, you can go into the downloads and the preferences of Xcode 5 and download the 6.1 simulator. That actually installs the old simulator in with the new one. And if you go into when you're running the simulator, you go into the hardware menu item and you can go to the device. And if you pick the iPhone version, just iPhone, nothing else after it, no 4-inch, no Retina, the only option for that is a 6.1 SDK. And that will always show up in that version. So if you set that up and then run your Delphi app, it'll run it on that SDK version 6. It's the only way I've been able to get that to work.
I thought there was a setting under simulator in the ID target platform, but maybe I remember that wrong.
If you have Xcode 5, they changed it.
That's why. Okay, so then you go over into hardware. You're right. You can choose the device. IPhone device option.
Yeah, I was
finishing that.
shooting a video, and halfway through it, I with IOX code 5, and also my simulator looked different.
Okay.
Oh no.
Yeah, I've got simulator 6061. I think I even installed 5051, even though we don't support it or test with it with FM. But well, great day in
And did I ask the Listview and Listboxes be sorted question?
You did, yeah, and they can.
Okay.
I couldn't find that one. Who's that by? This box is sorted.
It was by Michael. Okay.
Okay, sorry. And I should say that the TMS FMX grid for FireMonkey does single column sorting and multi-column sorting as well. Anyway, plug for TMS. Sorry.
Listview manipulation, does it also work in Windows? What you were showing today?
Yeah.
Yes.
Listview is available on all platforms.
Okay.
FireMonkey platforms.
Do you prefer Style Designer or customize Listview and Listbox items with code? What do you think of the Style Designer?
That's a very interesting question, because ever since I started doing this, I've been kind of grappling with that same thing. The Style Designer has a ton of flexibility in it. It can be a little difficult to work with. It's not always it doesn't always show you exactly what you think you're seeing, and so once you get used to it, you can be more effective with it. But again, its sheer power and capabilities, it's really amazing that what you can do with it. The approach that I followed with the Listview definitely harkens to me much more of a traditional approach of component writing, composite controls, doing it all in code, being very lightweight. And so to me, I don't think it comes down to a preference. I think it really comes down to what is it that I want to accomplish. I think being comfortable in both is going to be useful. How many developers will have a need to really customize the elements of a list view? I don't know. I think the fact that we can do it gives us some extra flexibility that initially turns people off of the list view, because they see all this functionality of the list box, and now all of a sudden says, well, if you really want to have the performance, you have to sacrifice all of that and go down to just these little customizations that we offer, which are good, but Delphi developers like having options, and I think this kind of meets that. So to me, that's the best way I can answer that right now.
I've done it both ways. When I'm only doing a few specific kind of items that I want to do on a list view or list box, I just do it in code. I like begin update, boom, 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 do a few things, set a few properties, and then end update, and it just shows up. But again, if you were trying to set 20 things or 30 things on every item, that'd be a lot of code, refactored or whatever. But I did that little stock price, not the prices. I just put red, green, because I didn't want Bloomberg Stock Analytics get mad at me in one of the webinars that I did. And there it was nice to just, when you had 2 or 3 things that I was playing with. Yep.
Okay,
Sorry.
so it's actually 3 o'clock.
Excellent.
All right, so thank you so much, Ray. And I guess we get a double dose of Ray with...
I love that. A double dose of Ray.
Double dose
It's
of
a
Ray.
triple dose, actually, with a break.
That's true. We had it earlier.
Because that's too much Ray.
Yeah, that'd be too much Ray. Creating custom controls for the FM application platform.
Favorite.